Good morning. Welcome. Glad to see everybody. Nice to see you all, and welcome to our discussion this morning on crisis management. My name's Beth Martino. I'm the Senior Vice President for Public Affairs at the American Healthcare Association. So I lead our national press response and proactive press efforts as well at the national level. And I'm really excited to be joined by what I think are three experts who can give us some insight on crisis management, not just in communications, but across really all aspects of our operations. Before we dive in, I'm going to just start with introducing our panel. First, we have David Scharf. David is one of the country's leading trial and appellate attorneys, serves as a senior counsel to CEOs and multinational companies. He's more than 25 years of experience representing and advising clients on a number of issues from commercial and real estate transactions, restructurings, and many other business matters. He leads the litigation and counseling practices that serves some of the country's foremost financial institutions and businesses. We also have with us Michael Fragin. Michael is a veteran public affairs strategist with extensive experience in communications, issue advocacy, and government relations. He has run dozens of campaigns at all levels of government in New York, New Jersey, Florida, and Connecticut. His consulting roster focuses on real estate, healthcare, political, and nonprofit sectors. And finally, we have Alex Barth, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Personal Healthcare, a hands-on community-based healthcare organization that currently owns and operates 25 nursing homes, a few assisted living centers, licensed adult daycares, and outpatient rehab clinics in the northeast portion of the country. He's been involved in nursing home management for more than 20 years and is responsible for all day-to-day operations of the company. So as we prepared for our panel, one of the things we talked about is what is a crisis, and kind of just the idea that there are actually a number, I think, of people that we all interact with who think, I'm never going to be affected by a crisis. We've all, of course, most recently experienced COVID, but a lot of people have said, okay, we got through that, I'm good. But in fact, a crisis can be any number of situations. It can be a human resources issue. It can be a natural event like a weather emergency. It can be a strike. Lots of different things that actually can kind of comprise a crisis. And today, what we'd like to do is talk about how and why we should be prepared for any number of those kinds of events, what our response and communication would be and should look like during a crisis event, and then once the dust settles, what do we do in follow-up, and how do we sort of reassess and recover? So to kick us off, I thought I'd start with Alex. Just sort of ask Alex, what do you recommend from your perspective organizations do and think about to have an effective plan for communications and operations during a crisis?
So when it comes to crisis, I think the belief has to be that we need to plan for the worst and pray for the best. That's probably the best thing that we can learn. And really make sure that, do we have the right policies and procedures? Have we drilled these policies and procedures? Is our team fully integrated in understanding what to do when a situation happens? Because that situation is never going to happen at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. It's going to happen on Friday at 5 o'clock or 3 in the morning. That's the only times that emergency is happening. Do we have a real risk management program in our buildings? Do we have a high-risk meeting on a weekly basis to review our potential liabilities? Do we have a corporate compliance team that is really giving our staff, our families, our residents a voice where they have the ability to speak to us before they call someone else? Everything that happens started somewhere. Do we really have the accident and incident procedure that our team is fully educated on, that when that small thing happens that could potentially explode into a larger situation, that we're going to be able to nip it in the butt right away? And more importantly, that if it is something that is a large thing that is going to develop, are we taking a team approach and not dusting it under the covers, but really addressing it in the most important value?
Beth, I think one of the things that we all need to focus on is that last point. We can't sweep it under the rug. Somebody is going to make a complaint, whether it's to a regulatory agency, whether it's to a reporter. Events at our facilities don't go unnoticed, and being unprepared to address them, but most importantly, be proactive about them. Know who your stakeholders are. And I know when we were talking about this, Michael's point is all about know who your government relations people are, who are your stakeholders that you need to communicate. So Michael, I'll turn it to you.
Well, you didn't mention the lawyers. The lawyers are, and we're all laughing, but the trial lawyers are a frequent antagonist of this industry. And once they sink your teeth into a specific facility, they really don't let go until they've extracted a lot of blood and treasure. But to your point, I want to, I guess, lead is everybody should take a relationship inventory. Okay, in business in general, it's nothing new to say relationships matter. And the relationships that you make before the crisis happened are the ones that you can call upon when there is a crisis. Don't think to yourself, well, a couple weeks ago, I went to a fundraiser with the governor of a certain state, and I gave a couple grand, and he's going to be my friend, he or she is going to be my friend for life. And if you have an issue with it having to evacuate the building or for some reason, whether it's an outbreak, whether it's a fire, a water main break, water contamination, all kinds of things can come about. Guess what? You're not calling the governor in order to do that. That's the local fire chief. That's actually police chief, county legislator, county executive, the small potatoes type of people that a lot of people in the industry tend to ignore in the good times and try and find them and frequently, thumb through the yellow pages, metaphorically, to try and find their contact information when the blank hits the fan. So know that, have those relationships in place. The good operators are the people who have and developed those relationships over time with anybody out there who is a touch point for them in the political or public affairs world. And it also can't hurt to know who the reporters, know who the papers are, know who the local papers are. Advertise there, because that can help you with the publisher. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Sponsor a local Little League, sponsor a health fair, bring people into your building. You'd be surprised, and this is, I think, the most important point. On your own team, especially if you're a multi-facility operator, how many people know people in the local environment? How many people have either worked or you might have local officials who actually work for you that you don't know about? Okay, many political jobs are part-time jobs. So somebody can also be a county legislator and be working in one of your facilities, or they have a relative who stayed in one of your facilities and was a resident there for a little while. Hopefully they had a good experience. That can help you short-term, medium-term, and long-term.
Great points. You both touched on something that I want to ask about, being in the public relations seat. I'm thinking this has happened a lot, but just recently had a skilled nursing facility reach out to me. They'd been contacted by a national reporter. I know everyone in the room will be shocked when I tell you the story was not going to be good, and they wanted to know what to do. They were looking for some advice. So I get on the phone with the facility administrator and their legal counsel, and in what is a common scenario, the legal advice and the PR advice were two completely different things. We had a lot of talk on my end about transparency and how we needed to try to be forthcoming, and the legal advice was essentially to say no comment. And I'm curious from everyone on the panel, but maybe David, if you wanted to start, how can we work on the planning side to kind of ensure that communications and legal work in harmony and are not in conflict in those situations?
Well, Beth, the first thing that struck me about the scenario that you described was it was already too late to be doing the planning once that call had come. This is all about planning, coordination. You're going to have an intrinsic reaction from lawyers who are in the world of risk mitigation. Say nothing, because if you say nothing, it won't hurt you. And then you have the business side of things, which is we need to communicate. We need to communicate to our stakeholders. If you have the right team in place in advance because you know these things are going to happen in your business, You've got to find the lawyers who understand the importance of the business and the business of communication. There aren't many like that are out there, but if you're a communicator, if you're somebody who can think forward and understand what those plaintiffs' lawyers are going to be looking for, how they're going to look to spin things, and you understand an industry, you're in a position to be able to work to mitigate that, because you know how to think as a defense lawyer standing in the courtroom, and those themes that you're going to be talking about to protect your client are the very same themes you want to start talking about on day one when that crisis hits. At our law firm, we have people who are trained as lawyers but are also trained in strategic communications. The combination of the two is critical, and just reaching out to your real estate lawyer, to your regular healthcare lawyer, in the moment of crisis when you get the call, you're going to get the big stop sign from them and then the tension that you're talking about. Have your professionals lined up early, know who they are, track them down, and make sure they can work symbiotically.
Well, more than saying no comment, I think what a lot of operators fall into is they could not be reached for comment. So remember, it's not what is said, it's what people hear. And when the idea of, well, we couldn't reach anybody for comment, it's almost like they just don't care. No comment is a strategy. I mean, it's not always the best strategy, but you have to understand what your pitfalls are, like with anything. The threats against you, whatever the crisis could be, it could be severe. So therefore, if you don't, it's not, I will agree with David, it's not always better to say something that's the wrong thing. And I think that's a very important point. From a communications perspective, you're always interested in transparency. You're always interested in being confident in your explanation and in spinning it in a good way and making a positive statement towards the public. And it's always important to be positive about it. But
and truthful.
But at the same time, don't say things that can be easily disproven. And a lot of people fall into that trap as well. And so all of a sudden, the next day, there's a story feeds on itself. Sometimes you have to kill off a story by starving it of information. It's not always so easy. This is an industry that is not so used to working with the press and working with the media. And we're in a political situation that I've been in. It's always the best thing is to get all the information, get everything out, get ahead of it, and try and make it a one-day story. That doesn't always work. Really have to identify what the threats are against you, whether they are regulatory, whether they are legal, and then try and figure out what that strategy will be. But it's very important to work, as David said, symbiotically.
I think we need to realize today that 90% of our residents, 90% of our staff probably live within 5 miles of our building. So whether you're looking at things from a referral perspective, whether you're looking at things from a staffing perspective, but it's more importantly to even look at it from a community perspective. We're a community provider. We're offering a service. Everyone's going to talk about it anyway. So by being transparent, and again, I don't think that has to mean any admission of any guilt. It really has to be able to say that we're taking this seriously, that we care, that this incident and this situation is important to us, we're evaluating it, and we're following up with it very seriously. And usually, if you have those relationships that Michael discussed with your local community, which is going to be the people who respond to an incident, or going to be the people that are going to ask questions, many of those people will call you directly before the press even calls you for a statement to hear what happened, what's going on. You know, I think being at eCap, we have to realize that after many incidents that happen, within 24 hours, we're getting a call from our banks saying what happened. And how are we going to respond to them is equally as important in dealing with these situations.
Can I just add one more thing with regard to the press? And this happens a lot. A lot of operators will say, well, they never called me. They never called. No serious journalist is going to do a story without getting a comment, or at least trying to get a comment. That's just a fact. they're going to try. They probably called the wrong person, and the person who picked up the phone didn't know how to handle it within your organization, and this happens more often than not, and it wasn't triaged appropriately. And because that happened, well, I guess they never called you because you might not have gotten that call relayed to you. And that's an issue, as Alex pointed out, within your organization that you have to plan for ahead of time.
Just working off Michael, I think that's why when you do have a situation or in your planning phase of a situation, you need to have an incident commander. You need to have someone who's on the scene, who's going to take charge. You need to have someone who's going to communicate to your regional office, someone who's going to represent ownership, and to make sure that you have that united front with your communication as well.
Now, we all walked in here and we walk around and we look at these screens before all of us good-looking people are up there. Everyone's got their brand out there. You walk into the room there, everyone has their logo, everyone has their tagline. Well, that means brand is important to you and it's important to your industry. And how you're known is your reputation. You have to think about every single incident as potentially adversely or positively affecting your brand. How you reacted can kill your brand and hurt your business, and how you reacted can enhance your brand with all of your constituents and stakeholders. So if you believe in brand and brand strategy, and I think we're all here and we're seeing how important that is to the industry, you've got to engage in reputation management to protect your brand and enhance it.
Really great points. Kind of starting to think about once you get it, you're in a situation. Alex, I want to start with you on this one. What is the role that your employees play, specific to communication, but maybe in some other ways as well? And how should you engage your employees once you're in a crisis situation?
So that's where I brought up that word communication. I think that it starts with the incident commander, but it really makes sure that you're not locking everything up in a conference room and not just leaving it behind those closed doors. Your CNAs, your housekeepers, many of them may have been involved with that incident. Your residents who are in your building, many of them are cognitive and heard what's happening. Your families know what's happening. And therefore, streamlining that process, really looking at what is our plan when something happens. How are we going to get statements? How are we going to audit this chart? Are we going to communicate with our attorneys, our insurance companies? What is the chain of command that we're going to follow as part of the process? In New York State specifically, you need to communicate with the New York State Police Department when many of these things happen now. And that's a separate process that has to be done. The Department of Health has to be notified. And really streamlining that as a team approach is what's important.
Alex, your point is there are so many people on the front line of an event, whatever the event is. That means you potentially have 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 potential communicators who have information about a particular event, but you need command and control. You need to know where does the reporting structure go, who is going to be communicating to whom and when, and what that communication looks like. So that goes back to the first point. It's about planning. It's drilling it the same way you drill a fire drill. You've got to drill a situation and have all of the players who are going to be involved in that planning be available to participate when you have, just pick a crisis. Somebody died unexpectedly in your facility. Nobody was around. Pick a scenario, create a scenario, make it a realistic scenario. And don't tell everybody 5 days in advance, oh, by the way, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to be doing a communications drill. Everyone should think it's live. Think this is the Army. We're going to have a situation, we're going to simulate it, and we're going to operate it. And we're going to be on the phone with our lawyers. We're going to be on the phone with our communication strategists. The only people that need to know about that this is going to be a test and a drill are the people on the regulatory side. You want to bring in your local police sheriff. You want to bring in your local fire inspector. Let them know that you're going to be drilling so that they also know that you have a state of preparedness. So when the real thing hits, they know they're not walking into a situation where nobody knows what's going on and it's going to be absolute chaos. They should see that you're prepared as well.
We need to realistically understand that when the Attorney General walks into your building, the Department of Health, or the media, they're going to speak to you, but they're going to speak to every one of your CNAs as well. And having a plan for that is just as important.
I would add that a lot of these situations, the organization, writ large, a lot of the people at the bottom, in the bottom rungs of the organizational chart, they look at some of these situations internally as trying to find out who's at fault and who is to blame. And that's something you have to instill in the people in your organization for them to understand that this is about a team effort to respond to something, and it could be nobody is at fault. Hopefully nobody's at fault. Hopefully it's just something, David alluded to, somebody died unexpectedly in the building, you're trying to get to it, doesn't mean that somebody was necessarily to blame. So you have to have that culture internally whereby people are willing internally to cooperate with people who are making these decisions, and therefore there's a free flow of information. Because one of the most important things is that the people at the top, and most of the people in this room and at this conference are the people at the top, are getting the right information from the people who have it.
One of the things that I think we all confront is the sense of urgency. These are emergent situations when they come up. They require quick response, but they require quick, thoughtful response. And the only way to get there is to pre-plan it, to have people, and you can have prepared statements. Strategic communicators have prepared statements for all different types of emergencies. And having those placeholders in place allow people to fill in the blanks and stay on script.
Yeah, having a holding statement is a really great tool when you're in the midst of just trying to keep your facility functional. That's a great thing to just have, that you can drop in some numbers and things and it's ready to go. I think one of the things that happened during COVID that has persisted is media interest has really skyrocketed around our industry. And I know just at AHCA, an average week for us pre-pandemic would have been a handful of media inquiries. And, in March of 2020, really through the whole year, we were getting, in some weeks, hundreds a week. So that has really continued in that there's a heightened level of interest, and certainly in a crisis and at the local level, particularly in small to mid-sized communities where the facility is a large employer and really an ingrained part of the community, the media are interested when something happens. So, Michael, I know the first piece of advice I always give people in thinking about what to say in a crisis is to lead with empathy. It's the first thing that I always recommend. Whatever you say, whatever you do, start with empathy. But from there, what are the 2 or 3 key elements you recommend for a great press response during a crisis?
Well, let me start with the bad for a second. And I think that this industry, in certain respects, has become a very convenient punching bag for elected officials. Right or wrong, this is not the panel to go into why that is, but it is definitely a convenient punching bag as of late, and it's probably not something that's going to go away. So know that that's going to happen. But what are the good things? Well, certainly, it was pointed out at the last panel, and I think it was really important with regard to lending. That was the last panel. But there are so many people who are residents of your facility who have nowhere else to go. They can't be housed anywhere else. It's too expensive to send them to a hospital. You're not going to send them home. You're responsible for them. These are people, so you can't just eliminate your facility. And as you said, it's the linchpin of many communities. It's a job creator. You have to think of yourself as the cornerstone, as a having somebody who's creating jobs and a driver of a local economy, particularly in rural areas. Rural areas, you have a great opportunity to take advantage of a really positive message at large. So I think that's really, really important to emphasize. And I'll just go back to something I said before. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. And if you look to make your response about care, and this is care, we care about the community, we care about our residents, we care about their family, we care about everybody, their well-being. That is important to emphasize at every juncture, at every opportunity. The other thing is always talk about the fact that you are accountable and responsible, okay? If something has happened, we are going to make sure that we're going to take responsibility for it. We are going to make sure, don't just walk away and say, well, not our fault, sorry, we'll try again. No, we're going to be accountable, we're going to improve. We're constantly bringing in best-in-class training and nursing and more assistance and new technology, new PT and new therapy, other therapies. Talk about what you're investing in. You're investing in the community, you're investing in care. But I think when it comes down to it, if you can't say care enough times in a sentence when it comes to the skilled nursing world.
We train our staff to always look at an incident through the eyes of a family member. If you're going to look at it and say, I'm a family member, it was my family member that had an incident, or I have another family member that's in there, what is this facility doing about it? Did it happen? People fall. Things happen. But what are they doing about it? Do they really care, as Michael's saying? What are they doing to change? How are they going to learn from this? How are they investigating? Even the fact that you are showing the fact that you have a serious investigation process, and you explain that to them, that you're going to be interviewing, that you are reviewing the incident very seriously, that's what they want to know. They want to know that this is real to you.
I think there's another important point besides the words and the tone. It's who the communicator is. As much as I like to stand up in front of a microphone and give a press conference, the lawyer that gets up there is communicating that there is a legal problem. So you shouldn't be your lawyer unless you've got a massive legal problem on your hand to be communicating. You want to bring stakeholders in to the communication process. Think about what it means to be empathetic, but also to have a family member standing there with you communicating. An owner is communicating. People who are members of the clergy, members of the community. The worst situation that you have is members of the public government getting up and having a counter press conference that is saying this is a horrible incident, we're conducting an investigation. Then you have the middle case scenario, which is government officials are out of it. But think about the opportunity that if you did all the planning that Michael told you, is you have the local fire chief there with you at the press conference talking about the response time. So the people that are there that are communicating with you is very important. You don't want a lawyer. You don't want somebody out of central casting, because somebody out of central casting who's a communications specialist looks like that you're not being empathetic. So get people in your organization, whoever that communication command person is, get them the training they need so that they can answer questions. Media training, communication training are all important elements, and you do all the planning and the prep in the background so that when you're standing there and you're communicating, whether it's with one reporter or 12, and you have the local news that's out there and is going to be reporting about your incident, that you come across empathetic, caring, and something that is an enhancement to your brand.
Local is really important, and particularly in a lot of facilities. Having local people with local roots, with deep roots, with local connections. It's It's really, really important. If you can get the local person standing in there talking on your behalf, that's much, much better than somebody, and I'm a New Yorker, than the guy from New York, talking in Kentucky.
I think just to work off what David said, I think the balance of when to have an attorney is extremely important. While on a PR standpoint, you probably don't want your attorney putting out your statement, at the same point, the importance of making sure when government agencies are investigating you, when you are dealing with potential liabilities, that you are communicating with an attorney and making sure on a legal basis that you are saying the right things, because every word counts.
Yeah, that is a very important point, right? If you're going to get a call from the Attorney General's office, the Department of Health, don't think you can just talk your way out of it. It's the common notion, and this is not applicable, but I'm going to use it by way of example. Every criminal defendant that is arrested thinks they can talk their way out of it, and you can't. So if you're going to get that call, and you're going to have a regulator, and you're going to have an agency, and they're letting you know they're issuing a subpoena or they're investigating a situation, have counsel communicate with them. There are some really simple steps that we take as lawyers to communicate, number one, that we're empathetic, two, that we care, number three, that we're going to be cooperating, so that people in blue vests with yellow letters don't show up at your offices looking to take documents out and start interviewing people. That's not a controlled environment. You can control it by having the correct professional communicating with your regulators, saying we're here, we're going to cooperate, and most importantly, the magic words, and I'll give away our secret sauce, let them know you're going to conduct a thorough internal investigation and you will report out to them. Develop the credibility in your industry that you are a credible source to communicate information. And if you do that, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I would add briefly to that the good news that we have is that we're in the caregiving business. That's what we do, is provide care to people, and bringing back our focus to our residents and how we are here to serve them and what we're going to do to make sure that we're taking the best possible care of our residents is always the best position to be in, and incorporating that into your response. So once we kind of get through a situation, or we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, Alex, I might start this with you. What are some of the things that you think about on kind of the post-crisis element, as far as refocusing and assessing how things went, and kind of doing the work that comes afterward? Because everyone shows up to help when there's a crisis, hopefully. But when that time is over and the dust is settled, what are some of the things that you start to think about?
So a realistic postmortem, and that really means reviewing your entire policy and procedure, reviewing your incident, truly identifying what worked, what didn't, where do you need improvements, how do you update your policies and procedures, and prepare for the next incident. Because that's going to happen again, and there's nothing worse than something happening again and you making the same mistake again. So really being prepared of saying, and taking that as a team approach. I think it's important to understand that you need to bring everybody in. You need to be able to speak to your line staff and say what happened today and what worked and what didn't. What would have you have liked to have seen? And give them a voice as part of that process, because they're going to be a part of that incident.
One of the things that people can't be afraid of is taking remedial steps. People have this instinct that said, if I take steps to fix something that went wrong this time, the plaintiff's lawyers that Michael was talking about in the first instance are going to seize on that, and they're going to use that against me. Well, that's just a misconception. Remedial efforts cannot be used to prove liability. So take it out of your mindset that just because you're going to make change for the positive, that it's going to be used against you. If you need to make change for the positive, go, make it, do it, make it happen. It's good for your organization. It's good for communication. What happened in the past? Yes. Will somebody bring a lawsuit? Will somebody have to defend it? Will you have insurance for it? Did you commit gross negligence, and were you willfully misconduct or not? Those are all legal issues that will hash itself out. But don't make the mistake of being afraid to take corrective measures, because that is important for you to do for your business going forward, and it does not and is not permitted to come back to bite you. That's a legal concept that's out there that is not well enough known, and I believe I see it affects the psyche of organizations when they're doing the post-mortem after a crisis.
There's a truism in government, and it doesn't necessarily apply so well to business, but a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And what it means is there's an opportunity out of every crisis to really have a real assessment of who your friends are, who answered calls, who stood up for you, who was willing to go to bat for you, who ignored the phone calls, who wasn't willing to take a phone call at 10 in the evening or 3 o'clock in the morning when you needed it. And we all know what those phone calls could be. We don't have to get specific. I think for an organization to understand of where they can reach out for help and who is going to be there in that time where they really need it is really important. Particularly in the political realm, who are the friends who are willing to either publicly or maybe not publicly, there's a lot of things in the political world they can do for you, and it's going to be quiet. How did I utilize those contacts? How did my organization utilize those contacts? Do I have them in the states where I need them to be? If I have a crisis in a facility one place, now I did well and we did well with that, will that carry over to the other facilities or the other states where I am? It's not always the same set of facts, so you have to go ahead and have that evaluation based on what happened in the particular event and have that carry over throughout your organization. There's no reason that one part of your organization should be operating at a higher octane than the other one. So you have to take all these pieces together and say, I can transfer all the things that worked over to my other facilities, and I can take all the things that didn't work and make sure that they never happen again at the other facilities.
I think an important way to end is also to say thank you and show your appreciation. And that has to be to your staff. When there's a crisis, many of them are working 24/7 under extreme stress. And really bringing them in and showing your appreciation to them, to your community, to the stakeholders that are involved is extremely important. Because something's going to happen again, you're going to need them. Most of us are multi-state, multi-facility operators. And I think looking and evaluating, do we have these processes streamlined amongst our buildings is an important factor that we can all learn from. Many things that you're doing best practice in one area, you may not be sharing or communicating with another area. And really taking these drills and looking at them on a global level is something that we need to get better at.
I would lean into something that Alex said about not just saying thank you to your staff, but making sure that they have the support. They've just been through a crisis also, and making sure that they're okay, showing empathy to them in those circumstances is just as important as showing empathy to the families of the people who were involved in the crisis. I would say one of the main threads for me is legal is involved at every point of the continuum. They should be involved in the planning. They should be involved in the drilling. There should be boots on the ground when things are unfolding, and then in the aftermath, figuring out what to do it. But one of the most important pieces of advice that I can give people is make sure that those professionals are the same. Very often people believe that they can do the planning with one set of lawyers, they can do the execution with another, and then we'll bring in the litigators at the end when there's a problem. Think about the fact that you're in a business of a continuum of care. Lawyers are in that business as well. If we understand what your plan is, we can execute in crisis, and we can help you develop the response for the future whether that future is in a courthouse or whether that future is dealing with a regulator or whether that future is simply being part of the continued development and evolution of your brand.
Really great points. You know, with the Michael, I'm curious what you suggest in terms of follow-up when a crisis has been covered by media, and that's becoming increasingly likely. In fact, sometimes the crisis is the media covering you at this point. And so, you know, you do an interview or you issue a statement and you say, here's what we're going to do, and kind of get through the situation. How do you recommend, in terms of reporter and kind of media follow-up, that facilities handle that component?
Well, there's no good way to introduce yourself to a reporter when you're at the wrong end of the crisis. So you could start by cultivating that relationship earlier on, and particularly with local papers, which can, particularly, let's say, you know, county papers, but there's a lot of decline in the local media, but local papers still cover things like a resident's 100th birthday or Veterans Day in your facility, where you have a bunch of veterans who are dressed up in uniform. If you don't do this, you should. And you invite the media in, and then they run a story. Or if you advertise in their papers, you have that relationship. When you're on the wrong end of things, and, you know, I think I don't want to name specific, but I'll, you know, local example. I live in Long Island. Newsday, our local paper, which for whatever reason never got around to vetting George Santos, but has decided over and over to run stories about nursing homes on Long Island. So we see where their priorities are. I think that if you're on the wrong ends, you're going to have to kind of weather the storm before you get there. But afterward, there's no question that you can try and talk about the corrective action that you're taking or how you've learned from the experience. It's a tough pill to swallow to want to have one of those stories if you want to do it, but there are ways to go ahead and do it. But every situation is different. There really isn't a playbook. I know that if you look in Google crisis management, there's all kinds of articles you can find out there that'll tell you what the playbook is for crisis management. I think we can all agree that there is no playbook for a specific incident. I open up the manual and I say, okay, here it is, page 4. This is how I speak to a reporter about it. The other thing is have somebody who knows how to speak to the media, knows what to say, knows what off the record means or on background means. Anytime you call up a reporter and somebody from your organization does it and they don't put it off the record or they don't put it on background, and on background just means you can be quoted without a name, but if they don't put it off the record, it's free fodder. They can put it in the story.
Media training, media training, media training. If you're really going to interface with the media, make sure you get your people who are doing that trained. And don't be embarrassed and think just because you can get up and speak at an annual dinner for a local charity that means you're media savvy and you're capable of doing it. There are things that you should learn, you should know, and invest in yourself. I'm going to keep going back to it because investing in this is investing in your brand, which goes right to your bottom line. Otherwise, you wouldn't be branding yourself.
I think those are really great points, and I know I often espouse the value of media training. You can't be over media trained. It's always good to be ready, and especially in crisis situations, having your facility administrator, your director of nursing, and people, as you know, Alex mentioned, they're going to want to talk to your CNAs and other staff, and so having all those people ready. So I think we have about a minute of time left. I just want to close with thanking all three of you for joining us today. I think this has been a great discussion, but want to give each of you a few seconds if there are things you would say kind of in closing and final thoughts.
I think I'll basically end where I started. Prepare for the worst, pray for the best, and have a plan for anything and everything.
I would say crisis breeds opportunity. There is no question that it's an opportunity to improve your organization, to improve the tactical and strategic thinking that you have around the organization. And I will also go back to the first thing. Relationships matter. In business, they matter in the public affairs arena. Relationships are really important. And I also just want to acknowledge J.J. Rabinowitz in the back who put this group together. I know he's sitting incognito, but it's really important to, as we said, to be grateful for that.
My final word of wisdom, I guess, is don't let legal strangle your business. Legal can sometimes be a noose, and maybe it's part, like as I said earlier, it's part of our training on risk mitigation, but you've got to have the right people involved who understand that this is one coin that has two sides, and you've got to let business do business, and legal needs to let business breathe.
Great points. And I would just close with, since you're here at eCap, this is a great place to make connections with people who can help you when you're in a crisis. Getting to know your colleagues, getting to know other people that can be resources for you. One of the things that I see are operators and people in facilities reaching out to one another when they are in a crisis to find out what the experience has been with someone they know, and they can be a great resource for you. And if you're a member of AHCA, of course, we're always here. If you're a member of any other state association or professional group, reach out to them, because there are resources and people that should be there to help you and guide you through some of these kinds of events that we talked about today. So I think our time's up, and thanks again to all three of you, and thanks to JJ.
Thank you, Beth. Great job.
Thank you.